gotten jobs that way through the network. Don't be afraid to leverage your network and the network of the people who know you and love you. Flattery goes a long way if it's authentic, but flattery and a very brief, easy to achieve ask. Universal advice for anybody thinking about their brand is being good at what you do and having integrity. Being like somebody who brings energy versus takes it. If you actually reverse engineer your relationships, you realize you can pull so many back to maybe 5 to 10 people. Every person I meet, I'm asking, who else can you introduce me to? And just that basic question is unbelievable how many people you can meet.
Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Leaders in Talent podcast. And today is with me, Joy Sybesma. Joy, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Adriaan. I'm excited for the conversation.
Yeah, definitely. So let me give you a little bit of background who Joy is. Joy is the founder and CEO of SkillJoy. She provides leadership development for CEOs and teams. She has served as a chief people officer for global tech companies, co-founded P5 Collaborative Consulting, and is just passionate about helping teams achieve sustainable high performance. Joy is a University of Minnesota alum and a certified leadership coach from Harvard. And one of the things that she's most excited about is her recent launch of her invite-only Chief People Officers Dinner Club, Wendy Road in New York City. Joy, welcome.
Thank you, Adriaan.
Now, Joy and I already had the pleasure of working together because, Joy, you hosted an incredible leadership workshop in my living room, which was highly rated. And one of the things that I've noticed as I'm building up my network myself in New York is that every other person seems to know you, Joy.
No way.
And it's true because I invite people over and they say, oh, yeah, we've met at a Troop HR event or we've met at this event. And then they mentioned, oh, I did a workshop with Joy or I've ran into Joy. And I think it's very telling for the conversation that we're going to be having today because we are actually going to be talking about networking and the power of networking. Yeah, Joy, let's dive right in. Can you tell me how networking has contributed to your overall success in your career, both personally and professionally?
Yeah, I think it's probably the number one reason I feel like I've been successful. The number one reason. And I think it has taken a few different forms. First of all, if people actually in New York believe that they all know me, it's because I spent most of my career in New York and I was lucky to get opportunities in the HR space sooner than I was actually qualified for them. And so I made a point of it to constantly be finding people who are more experienced than me and smarter than me to help me. Because I was lucky enough to get into these positions without the classic experience. And so I feel like it was a competitive advantage early on in my career to actually have the humility to realize what I didn't know and that I was going to need people around me who knew those things and would be willing to help me. And so I actively created a network, and I can talk about some of the strategies of how to do that. When I moved to New York City in 2008. And then I spent from 2008 till 2020 in New York City and career-defining, life-defining chapters. And I really invested in not only building a network of people who could help me, but being a resource and a person who would add value to others as well. I would say it was the single most critical element that contributed to my success, not only in kickstarting my career in New York City and building my network there and helping me feel successful in my roles, but also now that I run my own business, I've been doing this for almost 5 years and it's taken on a different form, but it's the most important thing to continue to sustain success in my business as well.
Are you facing market volatility, need to hire quickly, or have a team that sits idle? Meet Matcher, your flexible recruitment and sourcing partner. Scale your recruitment capacity up or down without compromising on quality. Trusted by Booking.com, Miro, Heineken, Grammarly, and Deal, Matcher is the RPO disruptor making waves in Europe and the US. For scale-ups and corporates, Matcher covers engineering, go-to-market, and G&A roles. Visit Matcher.io to see how we can support you. That's MATCHR.io.
Has it been more of learn by doing, or have you had a mentor early on that said, hey, your network is your net worth, start actively engaging with others outside of your direct network?
I think it was both. I inherently am a person who enjoys human connection. I think that is just true.
Yeah, I can
so
tell.
it's not necessarily like, oh man, I got to talk to somebody today. Like it is somewhat inherent to me. And so I think I've figured out though how to teach other people how to do some of the things that may not feel as inherent to them. And I also was lucky early on in my career to work for people who opened doors for me and to pay attention to who those people were, what they found valuable in me, and then making sure I could replicate that formula in other circumstances where it wasn't necessarily happening organically. One specific story, I had a boss's boss, and she invited me to a book launch party at her home. And those things where you're like, oh, I don't know if this is going to be valuable. So you're pretty much thinking you're going to say no. But for whatever reason, I decided to go. And I ended up meeting the author of a book called The Myth of the Nice Girl, Fran Hauser. And I was so struck by her story and just her path and her words. And I remember being a really aggressive, annoying person at her book signing to get time with her. Well, that was probably 10 years ago. And Fran and I have never worked at the same company. We've never been in business together, but she has shown me several strategies around networking. And one of the first ones is she's a super connector and she's not afraid to open doors for other people. And so I've really learned how to find those super connectors and then cultivate my network with them and my relationship with them. So for example, once every 6 months, I'm going to send a note to Fran. And even if it's not asking for something, it's offering something and offering value so that she continues to think of me, so that she can perhaps introduce me to people. And then just last week, she happened to be hosting an event in New York. I extended my trip by a day just so I could be in person with her because I hadn't been in person with her since before COVID. Having a person like that who's got this abundance mentality and is willing to open doors for you, but also keeping track of them and identifying them as those super connectors and then investing time in them.
So good. Hey, and you also said, so this is professionally, right?
Yeah.
Is there anything personally that has stood out in this journey?
Oh my gosh. I don't know if you feel this way, Adriaan, but I feel like most of my clients are my best friends. And as I get older, I want to spend time with people outside of work who are doing compelling and interesting things in their work. It's just really fascinating to me. I actually hosted my 40th birthday this past year. And my initial guest list, my husband was like, are you going to invite any of your friends? These are all your clients. I'm like, they're one and the same. So I think by nature of trying to be valuable, by paying attention to people, by finding those super connectors and nurturing it, you naturally make friends too. And I think that's almost more of the mindset I think people should take around networking is like building relationships, not transactional, not like I need a job or I want a client, but how can I invest in this person and in this relationship for the long road? The road is long and you never know where a relationship might go. I do have a specific example too.
That was so good.
So I got brought on to be a fractional head of HR at an organization that was growing, and they had a chief of staff in-house who was elevated into the head of people role. So I was brought in to be her external mentor and support system. Well, we ended up being like a super team, like a dream team, high-performing team, even though she was internal and I was external. We were able to really disrupt the HR function, build a completely unique org structure to support the business. And when it was time for me to move on, I ended up introducing her to her next 2 job opportunities. Over that time, she ended up bringing me back into another organization. We ended up co-founding a special project for founders. And now she's my co-founder on Wendy Road and one of my best friends today. So an example of how it can start as maybe a more business-oriented relationship and you're paired in this way. But if you invest in that person, you never know where that relationship and where your partnership and your collaboration can go. So a real example that I've
great example.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about strategies, right? You already mentioned what strategies have you found that are most effective when you want to make meaningful connections, especially, for example, doing a job search?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's take the job search angle first. And the audience is going to know this better than you or I know this, but job searching is and it's not being afraid to leverage who in the right ways. I've actually recently been coaching quite a few people who are looking for their next opportunity. And I've been struck by how many people are avoiding asking people for direct connections on LinkedIn or asking people for referrals. And I've only gotten jobs that way through the network. And so just the first strategy is don't be afraid to leverage your network and the network of the people who know you and love you. And that can be as simple as saying, hey, Adriaan, I see that you're connected to these 5 people on LinkedIn. How close of a connection is that? And if close enough, would you be willing to introduce me for this specific role, attach the job description, and here's an intro paragraph to make it super easy for you to connect me. So make it low lift. Don't be afraid to utilize your network. And the second piece is if you don't have that big of a network yet, identifying, make 2 or 3 people who do have a bigger network, who have experienced your work and who know you, and even ask them if you can leverage their network in some way. And then another piece of advice on the job search front is to find, I call it LinkedIning myself. Okay. So I like to go on LinkedIn occasionally. It's not necessarily a great habit, but it's helpful. And find people who are doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And see one, how they're positioning themselves on LinkedIn, but also who they're connected with, and even asking them for insight and advice on your job search. So I've reached out to strangers who have similar profiles to mine, saying, hey, this is the type of thing I'm targeting. Any advice that you'd give me? I really respect what you've accomplished in your career and how you present yourself. So flattery goes a long way if it's authentic, but flattery and a very brief, easy to achieve ask. I think the last thing I would say is professional networks. You mentioned Troop HR at the beginning. I'm involved in a lot of professional networks, and it's like that X2 factor or whatever it's called, and just the power of every person has 100 people that they know. So if early on in your career, even later on in your career, you can plant yourself and then be valuable within a community that is potentially industry specific or function specific. And there's one for every industry and every function out there. Usually they're as easy as a Slack group. Adding value there, and then also being willing to ask those communities for opportunities or respond to opportunities as they come. That was a lot, but those are just...
but so good, right? There's so many nuggets in there. This is something that I've struggled with in the past when I joined or got invited to join a specific network, is the cost associated with the network. How do you look at cost versus the network and the benefit that this might add and the doors that might open because of certain networks?
Yes. A couple of things. One is most companies have a professional development budget or stipend, and savvy networkers use some or all of that stipend for community. So I think normally we think of, I have to go to a class or a conference. And if you think about the ROI of a class or a conference, you may actually get more tactical insight on how to do your job well and deep connections that may lead whoever knows where by being a part of a community. So I'd say repurpose that budget towards these communities. Also, a ton of them are free, especially the Slack ones. So I would say ask your network on which communities are they involved in that they think are valuable and what type of price point is it. And then the other thing I would say there is, I remember my first job in New York, I went to a breakfast and it was hosted by like a vendor, right? And these, especially if you live in a big city, these are everywhere. Like you can find vendors to take you to breakfast, right? And I just paid attention to who I thought were the 2 people in the room I could learn the most from. And I went up to them after and I said, would you be interested in continuing this and having coffee once a month together? We ended up having coffee together for 4 years.
Wow.
It didn't cost anything. It was just some courage to ask. And then the tenacity and the follow through to keep it going. But full circle, one of those people I just reunited with post-COVID, and we're going to probably do a really interesting project together.
Wow.
So you can, if you can't afford it or you can't find it, build it.
So let's talk about that. So how do you do that? How do you build a professional network? Or a network? Doesn't even have to be professional, but where do you start? Like, what are some of the things that you've learned of being the super connector and community builder that you are?
Well, I think you start with the low-hanging fruit, So the low-hanging fruit, like I think about, and low-hanging fruit being like, it's easy because they're already in your network. So first thing is everybody already has a network.
Mhm.
If you're working, you already have a network, right? Even there's a lot of people who start college and already have a network thanks to their parents or their personality, right? I never had the like family network. It was like all these doors are going to open for you because your mom knows this person. I never had that. I had to build my own. But I think your network is a direct extension of your reputation and your brand. So I would say before you can even think about networking, you start thinking about your brand. And I think universal advice for anybody thinking about their brand is being good at what you do and having integrity, being like somebody who brings energy versus takes it. So I would start there. And then who is responding to your brand authentically? So I think about this person I worked with early on in my career, and I was an HR business partner, and he was like the head of sales, and he was my client, my internal client. And I remember being like, wow, he actually respects me and like wants to know what I think. And it was the first time I felt that validation of my function and my role in that function. And so I never let him go. I worked with him for 6 years, and we have not worked together in probably 15 years. And he's still somebody that I prioritize seeing every time I'm in New York. And he's opened up so many. So I think it's paying attention to who is responding to you authentically, continuing to add value to them, and then not letting them go. So a friend of mine actually built a CRM, but for his network.
Yeah.
I don't have that, but I have a massive spreadsheet that I keep, and I bold my top 25 on that list. Okay. And my top 25 are people who I think are inherently good people, who are incredibly smart, and who I believe I would love to work with or for or support in any way I can for the rest of my life. Those top 25, my strategy is that they know that they're in my top 25. They feel it because they see me investing in them. So if I travel to a city, I'm prioritizing seeing my top 25 if they live there. If I'm going to a conference and I know some of them will be there, I proactively make sure that we're going to have time together when we're there. And then I think, and this is, I can attribute this to Fran, my mentor I talked about earlier. She has an amazing book called Embrace the Work, Love Your Career. And it's like a guided career journal. And there's an activity in there, and it's all about identifying your super connectors. I wish I'd done that way earlier in my life. But the super connector being that person who, if you actually reverse engineer your relationships, you realize you can pull so many back to maybe 5 to 10 people. So I think identifying that. And then if you're a person who's, if you're listening to this conversation, you're energized by this. And one of the things I find with being a super connector is it feels so good to be helpful and know the right person who's willing to take a call. One example here, I have a coaching client who just randomly was like, I have 2 dream mentors. And he sent me their names and their LinkedIn profiles. And I said, I actually happen to know one of those dream mentors, CHROs, and I can probably get you a meeting with him.
Yeah.
Oh my God, right? Like life goals achieved. And
so cool.
Again, because of the relationship with that person, like 1, I'm willing to ask. 2, I'm sure that she's going to do her best to ask. And if it can happen, it will happen. So just some thoughts on how to actually do it from the beginning.
So good. So one thing that I learned also, like starting from scratch in New York when I barely knew anyone, is actually I then tap into a super connector and then offer them, in my case, I have a beautiful living room where I can host people and can host dinners, but I don't have to network, right? So I team up with someone like yourself and say, hey, can you invite your network? I will make sure that I'll pay for the drinks, the food, and the venue. That will be my part of the relationship. In this case, where you bring in your network. And that's how I've been able to personally grow my network here from scratch in New York.
And Adriaan, we've talked about this, but like that is such a generous gift that you're giving to the New York community. And I left that event and having met a bunch of people I had never met before, and ended up going to a dinner with a smaller group after. And I'd say 2 of those people I'm probably going to be connected with for the rest of my life. It was just the magic and the power of bringing the people together in a great space like yours.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you doing that very much.
Yeah, no, amazing. Hey, in terms of some things that I've experienced and something that I learned, and I would love to hear from you, is long-term relationship versus transactional relationship, and like also like where do you find the balance? Because maybe some people, you also need to like be a little bit strategic of who you invest time in for a longer period of time, who maybe not on that top 25 list. How do you navigate that?
This is where I'm going to be a little bit ruthless. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that networking starts with an objective. So the objective may be to find 5 big clients in 2025, right?
Yep.
That's probably one of my objectives right now.
Yep.
An objective may be to build a network in New York City, right? An objective may be to get more users on your product. It may be to start to plant seeds. You're not quite ready for the next job, but you want to be ready when you're ready. So I think first and foremost is like, what's my objective? And then who are the right type of people to invest in order to achieve that objective? Probably most people have a few objectives simultaneously, like in parallel, that they're playing out, right? I've never thought about it this way, but let me see if I can articulate what's in my brain so it can come out perfectly. First, know what your objective is and don't be shy about your objective. Okay. Then think to yourself, who do I already know who can support me in achieving this objective? And just call them. Reid Hoffman has a great podcast, and he interviewed Sir Richard Branson. And then they did like an excerpt of this episode and did like a master class on it. And I'll never forget, Richard Branson said anytime he has a big idea or a problem that he's facing, he asks himself, he follows this ACT model. The A is ask yourself, what if? Why? The C is call your network and tell them about the idea and see how they respond. Yeah. And T is take one step. And I even think that framework works really great for networking, but it starts like your objective and then calling your network and then taking one step towards it. The ruthless part is that different chapters of your life and career, your network may need to shift and evolve. This happens a lot. I've got this Wendy Road group that you mentioned at the beginning. And I put that group together specifically because I had people who had experienced a lot of things, had been a part of a lot of groups and communities, and were seeking something more intimate and elevated. So that didn't exist, so I had to build that for them. That network will likely be this group's inner circle for this next chapter of their career. There's times of your career where you're really there to teach, and there's times of your career where you're really there to learn. But I would argue that even if you're at a teaching stage, you should be looking for networks that will continue to push you and teach you as well.
And how do you do that from networking, business relationships, to actually turn them into clients? When do you feel that you can ask, or like when do you feel that you can sell your service or ask for the opportunity in the company?
I do it right away. And I think this just goes to feeling confidence and conviction in what you're selling and what you're providing.
Yep.
And that it's not salesy. It's that if you actually feel a connection with someone and you understand who they are and what their needs are, that it's not too soon to share what you do and offer up what you could provide that would be of value to them. Literally, this happened today. So I got connected to a brand new person. I live in Charleston now, and I'm building a new network in Charleston. I'm working really hard at it. And every person I meet, I'm asking, who else can you introduce me to? And just that basic question is unbelievable how many people you can meet. And I sat down for coffee with this person. We had a great connection. We had a 48-minute conversation. We're going to partner on something really exciting, and I'm likely going to do work with him and his team. Again, it goes to confidence and being present in the conversation to know if you're going to come across as too aggressive or tone deaf. I think that comes with experience and trial and error. Sometimes I've come in too fast and it didn't work. Yeah. Other times I missed an opportunity because I didn't go in fast enough with. But I think it comes back to like, be valuable.
Yeah.
If you feel like you can be valuable or helpful. And oftentimes I offer things for free to begin with. I'm happy to, it sounds like this is a really big transition moment for you and your company. I'm happy to spend another 30 minutes next week talking a little bit more in depth of it if that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Sometimes just that little extra is enough to then something more meaningful.
Yeah, so good. What I learned from Keith Ferrazzi, the book Never Eat Alone, is the power of generosity, right? Give and also don't expect anything back.
Yes.
Because that eventually will create the momentum that someone actually is like, hey, I appreciated Joy so much. She's given so much. Now's the time that I want to work and can work with you, right? Which really resonated with me.
I love that. And that's reminding me of that book. I need to pick that up again. That was such a good one.
Such a good book. And we'll put it in the show notes.
Yes.
You have a big network. How do you maintain your relationships over time?
Okay, so we talked about
The top 25.
The top
Yeah.
25. But then more broadly, I have a process, and it's been my like ritual of downloading after the end of a week. Some people are really good at planning their week. I'm really good at like reflecting on my week
Yeah.
and then using that knowledge to hopefully be better about the next week. One thing I do in my reflection, and this is just a 30-minute period that I do every Friday, is I ask myself some of the basic questions like what went well and what didn't go well this week. Sure. But who did I tap into that was helpful, or who helped me? And then asking myself who might be helpful next week or in the couple of weeks ahead. And even just that mental space to just ask yourself who, your brains are a powerful Rolodex. The other piece I'm finding is I'm just starting to try a little bit on LinkedIn and having a presence. And it's fascinating how many people are coming back to me who have been out in the ether or the orbit for a long time. But you realize if you can be generous and provide something that's valuable. I started a newsletter doing that then like people come back into your orbit. And so not only potentially is that content and an approach helping them or sparking something in them, but I'm getting value out of what they're bringing to me as well. So I would say just not being afraid of putting yourself out there, giving yourself some mental space to say who might be willing or able to help me, or who could I help in the week or month ahead, are two strategies to do it in a tactical way.
Hey, and interesting that you mentioned LinkedIn, right? Do you feel that you need to have a social media presence and be very active on different social media channels to be like a super good networking? Or what's your view there?
I think it really depends on your role. And so when I was internal within an organization, I didn't need to as much, right? Because it was much more about like the internal, but I was also hustling and networking like with just boots on the ground. So I think if you're a person who's really into like going to events and going to stuff and being in person, it's less important. If you're not that person, it's just like your digital identity, right? And if you are maybe even more introverted, it can be a great place. And I think that's a misconception people have, like, oh, I don't want to like put myself out there on LinkedIn and be like nauseatingly salesy and talking about myself. You don't have to talk about yourself. You can repost what other people say.
Yeah.
You can comment or like what somebody shared. And so I would just say, if that's an area that people are resisting for any reason, there's a lot of ways to have a presence there. And there's also a lot of like great free things. Like a friend of mine, Teresa Fessenstein, she does these AI clinics and they're on her LinkedIn profile and they're free, right? Yeah. It's basically if you're a people leader and you want to learn about some AI tactics, click on the link, join a free session. I think there's something about being on LinkedIn too, that you realize you can find like great learning opportunities. And in those learning opportunities, you find more people to network with as well. That's another strategy, is you like never miss an opportunity to make a connection. Yeah. So I think about, I work for a couple of venture-backed tech companies, and all of them had like a talent partner at the VC, right, who helped all of the portfolio companies. And I made it a really big point to become friends with them. And one, to leverage their networks, but also because with their networks comes all the knowledge and the how-tos and the mistakes that have been made that we don't need to recreate. But I found that actually tapping into those communities, and they would do these kind of like round tables with other people in my function. And similar to my early days when I was at this dinner and this breakfast and started my own coffee group, you pay attention to your peers. Yeah. And you're like, who stood out to me? Because they had a different point of view. They just finished something that I'm about to start, and reach out to them like right after, during the Zoom, private message. Just don't be afraid. People are amazingly helpful. They just need to be tapped. Yeah.
Incredible. When we started Matcher, we didn't know, we started Matcher in Ukraine. We didn't know anyone in Ukraine except one person. We literally started by saying on LinkedIn, who knows anyone in Ukraine? We got 20 comments. And out of those 20 comments, within a month, I've spoken to over 150 people.
Oh my gosh. Unbelievable.
And there was only one person out of the 150 that said, hey, like, you're starting a competitor. I don't want to talk to you. And that was the only person that said, no, I don't want to talk to you, where the rest was super, super helpful and granted me their time. That was incredible. It was such a good learning experience.
What perfect proof, though, for this concept.
And I do the same. When people ask me as well. So to round this discussion up, Joy, what tactical advice can you leave our audience with?
I would say just take a beat after listening to this and ask yourself, like, as we round out 2024, as we think about 2025, what are my goals? They could be personal goals, professional goals. What am I trying to work towards? And then do I have the network to support that? And if I have the network to support that, even coming up with 1, 2, or 3 strategies that you're going to take to actually double down and invest in that network so that you can achieve your goals. And if you don't, then ask yourself, how might I be valuable or provide something to people to start to cultivate and build that network going forward?
Amazing. Joy, talking about networking, what's the best way for our audience to connect with you?
Oh, okay. So there's so many ways. LinkedIn is great. Joy Sybesma, Sybesma. It's a hard pronunciation, but it's SY. You'll find me. Definitely LinkedIn. I actually respond to direct messages, so people can direct message me. You can visit my website, SkillJoy.net, or you can even email me if you want, joy@skilljoy.net. Any way that would be helpful. If I can be helpful to anybody, really, truly in any way, please don't hesitate to reach out. Looking forward to helping expand the network of people.
Amazing. Joy, this was a true testament to who you are, on how I've seen you and witnessed you of connecting in such a natural and organic way. And luckily also how we got connected. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. We'll put all your contact details in the show notes, and I'm looking forward to see where 2025 is going to take you.
Thank you, Adriaan. Really appreciate this and you being part of my network now too.
Awesome.
Thanks.